Wait, James and Diep finally take a real day off. But what is James' meaningful surprise waiting for her tomorrow morning? Hi everyone, hope you're having an amazing day. Today we're going to follow James and Diep as they escape the stress of DJ Farm and spend a peaceful, romantic fishing day by the river. Just the two of them. No work, no pressure, only quiet moments and sweet promises. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes. DJ Farm was unusually quiet that morning. No calls, no rushing, no voices at the gate. Just cool air and pale sunlight slipping over the hills. James stared at the ledger one last time, then closed it with a soft thud. Done. Diep walked in with 2 cups of ginger tea. She set one in front of him and studied his tired face like she was checking if he'd survived the week. You look exhausted. I fought paperwork, he said, and paperwork fought back. She laughed, then lifted her cup. Today, no work talk. He raised his hand. I swear. Diep gave him a look. If you break it, you wash dishes for a week, James groaned. That's blackmail. Then behave, she said, smiling. He drank the tea, letting the warmth loosen his shoulders. Okay, so what are we doing? We're going fishing by the river, Diep said, like she'd been waiting all week to say it. James blinked. Fishing? For real? For real. He pointed a finger at her. I'm coming, but I'm not touching worms. Diep laughed. We'll see. She nodded toward the door. You get the rod. I'll pack food. James headed out and found the fishing rod near the wooden house, still looking almost new. He checked the line, grabbed a small tackle box and tried to act like he knew what he was doing. Inside, Diep packed simple things. Rice balls wrapped in banana leaves, a tiny jar of salt and sesame, 2 guavas, water, and a small towel. When James walked in holding the rod, she smiled like a kid seeing a toy. Do you know how to use it? She asked. James stood tall. Yes. Diep just stared. He cleared his throat. I know. Enough. Good, she said, because I'm not letting you embarrass me in front of the fish. They left DJ Farm and took the dirt path toward the river. The walk felt slow in the best way. James reached for Diep's hand and she let him take it, their fingers fitting easily. Are you okay? He asked quietly. Diep nodded. I'm good. I just... like today. James squeezed her hand once. Me too. The river was calm and bright when they arrived, sunlight trembling on the surface. Diep led him under a big tree where shade cooled the stones. Here, she said, this spot. They spread a mat and sat close together. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The water moved steadily, and the world felt far away. James broke the silence. We should do this more. Diep glanced at him. You're the one who never stops. He smiled, a little guilty. Then you'll have to keep stealing me. Diep opened the tackle box and pointed. All right, let's fish. James picked up the rod and started fiddling with the line like it was complicated on purpose. Diep leaned in, amused. Show me your skills, she said. James nodded seriously. Step 1, pretend you have skills. Diep laughed under her breath. He opened the bait container, saw the worms and immediately leaned back. Nope. Diep held out her hand. Give it here. James stared. You're not scared. It's a worm, she said. Stop being dramatic. It looks like it wants revenge, he muttered. Diep smiled and hooked the bait onto the line with calm fingers. James watched, half impressed, half horrified. You're actually good at this, he said. Diep shrugged. I grew up around rivers. Sometimes fishing was dinner. The way she said it was simple, but it still hit him. James brushed a loose strand of hair from her forehead, gentle. I want your life to be lighter now, he said. Diep's eyes softened. Then stay like this. Slow. I will, he promised. She handed him the rod. Okay, cast it. James stood near the water, took a breath, swung back and launched the line forward. The splash landed, not where he meant. Diep covered her mouth, laughing. James turned, offended. That was practice. Sure, she said, still smiling. Come here. She stepped behind him and guided his hands on the rod. James froze for a second, her arms closed, her voice near his ear. "Relax," she whispered. "I am relaxed," he said too quickly. Diep teased. "Your shoulders say no," he exhaled. "Okay, better." "Gentle," she said. "Back and release." This time the cast was clean. The float bobbed on the surface, steady. Diep nodded, pleased. "See? You can learn." James looked at her. "Only if you teach me." She sat down again. "Now sit and wait." They sat side by side, watching the float drift slightly. Leaves whispered above them. The silence felt warm instead of empty. James leaned back on his hands. "You know what I like about this?" Diep turned. "What?" "No one needs anything from us," he said. "No calls, no pressure. Just quiet." Diep nodded. "Just us." James reached for his phone out of habit, then stopped. He held it up fast. "Not work. One photo." Diep smiled. "Fine." He took a quick picture of her by the river, soft sunlight on her face, hair moving with the breeze. When he lowered the phone, his voice softened. "I'm going to print that. Put it in our wooden house." Diep's cheeks warmed. "Why?" "Because I want to remember this day," he said. "The day we finally rested." Diep nudged him lightly. "Stop, you're making it too serious." James grinned. "Okay, new rule. Whoever catches a fish first gets a shoulder massage from the other person." Diep's eyes sparked. "Deal? And no cheating," he added. "The fish will come to me naturally," she said, confident. A few quiet minutes passed. James tried to look patient, but he kept staring at the float like he could force it to move. Diep sat calm, hands in her lap like she had all the time in the world. James leaned toward her and whispered, "If we catch nothing, I still want the massage." Diep whispered back, "Then pray harder." He smiled and looked back at the water. The float twitched. "Just a little." James froze. "Did you see that?" Diep leaned forward. "Maybe wind." "No," he whispered, suddenly serious. "That's a fish." The float twitched again, then stilled. Both of them leaned in, eyes locked on that tiny bobbing circle, waiting to see if the river was finally about to answer. The float dipped again, slow and deliberate, like something under the surface was finally committing. Diep leaned in. "Okay, that's not the wind," James whispered. "Told you." The river heard me. The float bobbed twice, then slid under. James grabbed the rod so fast he nearly tipped the water bottle. "Now!" He lifted a little too hard. The rod bent and his eyes widened. Oh, it's on," Diep laughed under her breath. "Shh, don't yank, gentle. Pull a little, then relax." "I'm not yanking," he insisted, voice trembling with excitement. "I'm negotiating." "Sure," Diep teased, moving closer. "Breathe, real steady." James took a slow breath and reeled. The line jerked once, then again. He shuffled back on the stones, trying to look brave. A flash of silver flickered near the surface. Diep's eyes lit up. "I see it," James grinned. "It's real." He eased the fish up. Small, shiny, wriggling. James lifted it like a trophy and whisper shouted, "I did it!" Diep covered her mouth, laughing. "Look at you." "The fish respected me," James declared. "The fish pitied you," she teased. "It chose me," he said proudly. "Destiny." Diep crossed her arms. "Destiny says you owe me a massage," James blinked. "Wait, whoever catches the first fish gets the massage," Diep pointed at him. "You said the other person gives it. Your rule." James sighed like a tragic hero. "Fine, I will honour the sacred river law." He tried to unhook the fish while holding it like it might bite him. Diep giggled. "You're scared of a fish now?" "It has wet energy," James said seriously. Diep crouched closer to the water. "Keep it or release it?" James looked at her. "What do you want?" Diep smiled softly. "Release. Today is for resting." James nodded and lowered the fish back into the river. Flicked away, leaving ripples that faded into calm. Diep watched the water smooth out. That was sweet. James sat back down, satisfied. I can be sweet. You can be dramatic, Diep replied, leaning her shoulder into him. I can be both. She held out her hand. My turn. James handed her the rod, suddenly nervous. Please don't make me look too bad. Diep smirked. No promises. She stood at the edge, relaxed and steady. Her cast was clean, the float landing perfectly with a soft plop. James stared. Okay, that was unfair. Skill, Diep said, smiling. They sat under the tree again, close enough that their shoulders brushed. The river kept its steady sound like it had all the time in the world. James offered the towel. You okay? Diep nodded. I'm good. Today feels easy. James repeated it quietly. Easy. A minute later, Diep's float tapped once, then again, then dipped halfway and rose. James leaned in, whispering, Now. Diep stayed calm. Wait. The float sank. Diep lifted the rod smoothly, letting the line tighten, then reeled with patient, practiced movements. James watched, wide-eyed. Wow. Diep shot him a look. Quiet. A small fish surfaced. Diep brought it in cleanly and held it up, proud but calm. James clapped softly. You win. You absolutely win. Diep smiled and nodded toward him. So, James sighed. Yes, massage. I know. Diep patted the mat. Sit. James turned around and sat. Diep's hands found his shoulders and started slow circles, gentle pressure, the exact spots he always carried stress. James exhaled like his whole body had been waiting for permission. Oh, wow. Told you, Diep murmured. You're tense. I didn't realise, James admitted, eyes half closed. I feel lighter. Diep's voice softened. You're allowed to rest. James stared at the water for a moment. I think I forgot how. You didn't forget, she said. You just don't let yourself. James swallowed. I keep trying to hold everything up. The farm, the plans, Diep said quietly. And me. James turned his head slightly. I want to hold you. Diep's hands paused, then continued. You don't have to carry me like I'm heavy. James looked back at her. You're not heavy. You're my home. Diep looked away fast, smiling like she was trying not to cry. Stop! Why? Because then I'll cry, she whispered. James reached up and covered her hand with his. If you cry, I'll just stay. No fixing. Just stay in. Diep breathed out. Okay. She finished the massage and sat beside him again. Their shoulders touched and the silence felt warm. Diep opened the food bag. Lunch? James perked up. Yes. She handed him a rice ball wrapped in banana leaf. He unwrapped it carefully, took a bite, and smiled like it was the best thing in the world. This is perfect. It's simple, Diep said. It tastes like peace, James replied. They ate slowly. Diep offered guava slices, and James fed her one without thinking. Diep accepted it with a shy smile. After a few minutes, Diep spoke softly. Sometimes I worry peace is temporary. James didn't joke. He listened. Diep traced the banana leaf edge. Like we'll have one good day, and then something will pull you away. James took her hand, firm and warm. Look at me. Diep turned. If anything comes, James said steadily, we face it together. But it doesn't get to steal days like this from us. Diep's eyes shimmered. You promise? I promise. Diep leaned her head onto his shoulder. James rested his cheek against her hair. They stayed until the sun softened and the air cooled. Dragonflies hovered low over the water. When they packed up, Diep released her fish too, letting it slip back into the river. It's a resting day, Diep said simply. No taking more than we need. On the walk home, James plucked a tiny wildflower and tucked it behind her ear. Diep touched it, smiling. What are you doing? Decorating my future wife, James said, playful. I'm not your wife yet, she reminded him, cheeks warm. He leaned closer, grinning. Not yet. By the time they reached the farm gate, the first stars were starting to show. James didn't let go of her hand right away. Diep looked up. What? James smiled, a little mysterious. Tomorrow morning. I have a small surprise for you." Diep narrowed her eyes. "What kind of surprise?" "If I tell you, it's not a surprise." "Is it big?" He shook his head. "Not big, just meaningful." Diep studied his face. "You're making me nervous." James squeezed her hand gently. "Don't be. Just rest again tonight." Diep hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." And as they stepped inside, Diep glanced back once, still wondering what he was planning, while James looked far too pleased with himself, like he'd found a way to protect their quiet happiness for one more day.
Dưới nắng sớm, bà vừa chặt mía vừa kể chuyện ngày xưa. Dậy chặt 3 hoặc 4 khúc cho đẹp để bán được giá. Đồng mía cao dần, 45 đồng trở thành hy vọng cho phiên chợ. Một cây mía đổ bất ngờ khiến cả nhóm kêu, rồi cười xòa vì kịp đỡ nhau. Chiều xuống, Linda buồn bã vì con rúi của mình đã biến mất. Nghi có kẻ trộm rình quanh nhà. CEO quang ghế đến lắng nghe và trấn an và tự sửa chiếc camera cũ trong kho, kéo dây lắp trước sân nhà để bảo vệ cô. Đêm đến, Linda nấu cơm nếp cẩm mời anh ở lại ăn. Hai người trò chuyện lòng ấm lại. Quang kể áp lực công ty, camera nháy sáng, bóng lạ thoáng qua, và không biết Linda có sống sót qua được đêm nay không. Mọi người nếu thấy video hay, hãy cho mình một like, một subscribe. Cảm ơn mọi người nhé.